My parents stole my college fund to pay for my sister's wedding. There are moments in life that split your world in two, the before and the after. For me, that moment happened on a sunny Tuesday in June, the day after I graduated high school. I walked into my kitchen, diploma in hand, ready to claim the future that had been promised to me. I sat down across from my parents, took a deep breath, and asked the simple, life-altering question. So, what's the next step for the college fund? The silence that followed was the answer. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and joy out of the room. My mom stared into her coffee cup as if reading her fortune in the dregs. My dad wouldn't meet my eyes, his gaze fixed on a spot just over my shoulder. And in that suffocating quiet, I knew my future was gone. The world tilted on its axis. The diploma in my hand felt like a worthless piece of cardboard. The knot in my stomach tightened into a block of ice. My entire future, the one I had worked so tirelessly for, had been sold for a one-day party. And as I sat there in the deafening silence of my parents' betrayal, a single terrifying thought crystallized in my mind. My own family had stolen my dream. Just weeks earlier, the acceptance letter from Westwood University had felt like a winning lottery ticket. It wasn't just paper, it was a golden ticket, a key to a future I had spent every waking moment of my high school career striving for. Westwood, my dream school, had wanted me. Me, the kid who spent weekends in the library, who turned down parties to finish extra credit, who had a vision board filled with pictures of the campus and quotes about ambition. I ran downstairs that day, the thick, cream-colored envelope clutched in my hand, my heart doing a frantic drum solo against my ribs. The smell of my mom's pot roast filled the air, a scent that usually meant comfort and family. That day, it smelled like victory. I found my parents in the living room, bathed in the soft glow of the evening news. My dad was in his recliner, my mom on the sofa, folding laundry. They looked up, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and parental calm. I didn't say a word. I just held up the letter, a massive, uncontrollable grin splitting my face. My mom's hands froze, a half-folded towel dangling from her fingers. My dad sat up straighter, the creak of his chair a loud punctuation in the silent room. The next few minutes were a blur of hugs, tears of joy, and proud backslapping from my dad. They told me how proud they were, how they always knew I could do it. And then my mom brought up the words I had been waiting to hear for years. "Just think," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "all that money we've been putting away for you, the college fund, it's all going to make this dream happen. You won't have to worry a thing." The relief was so profound it almost brought me to my knees. All those years of sacrifice, of knowing they were tucking money away while my friends' parents complained about tuition, it had all been worth it. It was a promise, a sacred pact sealed with love and hard work. In the midst of our celebration, my older sister, Sarah, floated into the room. Sarah, the golden child. Sarah, who had always been the sun around our family's planets revolved. She was beautiful, popular, and seemingly blessed in every way. She was also recently engaged to a wonderful guy named Mark, a fact that had been the central topic of every family gathering for months. She saw our tear-stained faces and the letter in my hand. Her smile was dazzling, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She offered a congratulations that felt perfunctory before immediately pivoting the conversation back to her own upcoming nuptials, specifically the floral arrangements for the centerpieces. My parents, as they always did, followed her lead, and the moment that had been mine was suddenly hers. I didn't mind too much. I was too busy floating on my cloud of acceptance letter-fueled euphoria. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of senior finals and graduation preparations. Sarah's wedding planning escalated into a full-blown tactical operation. Every conversation at the dinner table was about venues, catering menus, or the shade of white for the napkins. The budget, I overheard my dad muttering one night, was getting a little out of hand. But I didn't pay it any mind. My future was secure. The day after graduation, I walked into the kitchen, my high school diploma feeling like a prologue to the real story. My parents were sitting at the table, coffee mugs in hand, their faces uncharacteristically solemn. The time had come. It was time to talk about the fund, to get the paperwork in order, to start the process of claiming the future that had been promised to me. I sat down across from them, my hands slightly sweaty with anticipation. I took a deep breath and asked the question, the one that was supposed to be a simple formality. "So," I began, my voice bright with excitement, "what's the next step for the college fund? Who do I need to talk to at the bank to start the withdrawal process for the tuition payment?" The silence that fell over the room was immediate and suffocating. It wasn't a quiet pause, it was a vacuum, sucking all the air and joy out of the space. My mom stared into her coffee cup as if she could read her fortune in the dregs. My dad wouldn't meet my eyes, his gaze fixed on a spot just over my shoulder. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. My dad cleared his throat, a low, gravelly sound. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. A profound, gut-wrenching pity. He started to speak, his voice halting and heavy. He explained that Sarah's dream wedding was just that, a dream that required a significant investment to make a reality. He talked about family, about sacrifice, about how important it was for their eldest daughter to have the perfect start to her new life. He used words like understand and we knew you'd be okay with it. And then my mother chimed in, her voice thin and reedy. She said that the money was gone, all of it. They had used my college fund, the money they had been saving for 18 years, the money that was supposed to be my launch pad to pay for my sister's wedding. They had drained the account to give her the wedding of her dreams, and they had done it without a second thought, fully expecting me to just understand. The world tilted on its axis. The diploma in my hand felt like a worthless piece of cardboard. The knot in my stomach tightened into a block of ice. My entire future, the one I had worked so tirelessly for, had been sold for a one-day party. And as I sat there in the deafening silence of my parents' betrayal, a single, terrifying thought crystallized in my mind. My own family had stolen my dream. The first sensation was numbness, a profound, all-encompassing cold that spread from the block of ice in my stomach out to my fingertips. The words my parents had spoken hung in the air between us, tangible and toxic. Gone. The money was gone. I replayed the sentence in my head over and over, trying to make it compute, trying to fit it into the logical framework of the world I thought I lived in. But it wouldn't fit. It was a jagged, alien shard of glass that had shattered my reality. I could see their mouths moving, heard the drone of their justifications. Family comes first. Sarah's happiness is a priority. You're so smart, you'll get scholarships. But the sounds were distorted, like I was listening to them from underwater. They weren't talking to me. They were performing a script they had written for themselves, a narrative in which they were generous, loving parents, and I was the understanding, selfless child who would happily sacrifice my future for my sister's vanity. My dad reached across the table, his hand aiming for my shoulder, a gesture of comfort that felt like a brand. I flinched away, the movement sharp and involuntary. The flinch seemed to break through their self-delusion. Their expressions shifted from pity to a flicker of defensive annoyance. How dare I be upset? How dare I not understand? I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the linoleum with a screech that echoed the shrieking in my own head. I stood up, my body feeling foreign and heavy. I didn't say a word. What was there to say? Anything I could have uttered would have been a mixture of incoherent rage and soul-crushing despair. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, up the stairs, and into my bedroom, shutting the door behind me with a soft, final click. I didn't slam it. A slam would have been an act of passion, an emotional outburst. This was something else. This was the closing of a door. I sat on my bed, the diploma still clutched in my hand, and stared at the poster of Westwood University's campus on my wall. The smiling students in the photo now seemed to be mocking me. The future I had so carefully planned, the one that was supposed to start in just a few short months, was a gaping black hole. The numbness began to recede, and in its place, a white-hot rage began to bubble and churn. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, simmering burn that started in my chest and spread through my veins. I thought of all the times I had been told to be quiet, to not make a fuss, to let Sarah have her moment. The time she won the lead in the school play and I was told not to be sad about my role in the chorus because her success was a success for the whole family. The time she got a car for her 17th birthday and I was told to be happy for her because I could borrow it sometimes. My entire life had been a series of footnotes to her story. But this was different. This wasn't a role in a play or a borrowed car. This was my life. Over the next few days, I moved through the house like a ghost. I spoke only when spoken to, my answers clipped and monosyllabic. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. My parents tried to engage me, offering me my favorite foods, trying to start conversations about anything other than the elephant in the room. Their attempts at normalcy were infuriating. It was as if they had committed a financial and emotional homicide and were now trying to dust the crime scene for fingerprints while whistling a cheerful tune. Sarah, meanwhile, was blissfully, infuriatingly oblivious. She would float into the kitchen, gushing about the final dress fitting or the exquisite taste of the champagne they had selected, completely unaware that her fairy tale wedding had been built on the ruins of my future. Or maybe she wasn't oblivious. Maybe she just didn't care. The thought was even more chilling. I started to piece things together. I remembered my dad's muttered comments about the budget getting out of hand. I remembered the escalating extravagance of the wedding plans, the imported flowers, the five-star caterer, the live band. They hadn't just used the fund, they had hemorrhaged it. They had taken every last cent, every sacrifice my family had ever made for my future, and poured it into a single decadent day. I started doing my own quiet investigation. I looked through old mail, searching for bank statements my dad might have left out. I listened at closed doors when my parents were talking, their hushed, urgent tones a clear sign that they knew they had done something terribly wrong. The more I uncovered, the more the rage solidified into something cold, hard, and sharp. It was no longer just an emotion, it was a tool. One evening, I decided I couldn't live in the silent, suffocating tension anymore. I needed to confront them again, not as a child asking for help, but as an adult demanding an accounting. I found them in the living room again, the same spot where they had shattered my world. This time, I didn't sit down. I stood over them, my shadow falling across their faces. I asked them for the specifics. How much? How much was my future worth to them? I asked them to look me in the eye and tell me they believed it was fair. They stammered, they deflected, they fell back on their tired mantras about family and sacrifice. My mom even started to cry, but her tears felt like a weapon, a tool of manipulation designed to make me feel guilty for my own anger. That's when I knew. There was no reasoning with them. There was no appeal to fairness, to justice, to love. They had made their choice and they would defend it to the bitter end. I was no longer their daughter in their eyes. I was an obstacle, an inconvenience to their perfect family narrative. As I stood there, watching them twist themselves into knots to justify their betrayal, a new feeling began to take root amidst the anger and the pain. It was a feeling of absolute, terrifying clarity. I realized I couldn't rely on them. I couldn't expect justice from them. If I was going to fight for my future, I would have to do it alone. And as that realization dawned, a plan began to form in the back of my mind. A plan that was risky, ruthless, and had the potential to burn every bridge I had left. But at that point, I realized I was already standing on ashes. The plan didn't start as a grand cinematic scheme. It began as a quiet, desperate search for a lifeline. My first thought, fueled by a lifetime of watching legal dramas, was to sue them. I spent hours in my bedroom with my laptop, the screen's glow illuminating my determined face in the dark. I typed query after query into the search bar. Can I sue my parents for stealing my college fund? Legal recourse for misused family savings. Is a college fund a legal trust? The results were disheartening, a tangled mess of legal jargon and ambiguous outcomes. It seemed that unless the money was in a formal, irrevocable trust with my name on it, the law would likely view it as a gift from my parents, a gift they could legally reclaim at any time. They had been the ones to deposit the money, which meant, in the eyes of the court, it was their money to do with as they pleased. The thought of dragging my family into a courtroom, of airing our dirty laundry in front of a judge, was exhausting and demoralizing. It would be a long, expensive, and emotionally draining battle, with no guarantee of victory. My parents would play the victim, painting me as an ungrateful child, suing her own loving parents over a simple family misunderstanding. And they might win. The anger that had been a cold, hard tool inside me began to feel brittle, ready to shatter under the weight of legal futility. I was trapped. The law wouldn't help me. My parents wouldn't help me. I was 18, a high school graduate with a dream school acceptance letter and a bank account that was emptier than my parents' promises. For a day or two, I wallowed in the despair. I considered just giving up, accepting my fate, and attending the local community college. It was the path of least resistance, the path that would keep the peace, the path they wanted me to take. But every time I thought about it, a fresh wave of nausea would wash over me. It would be a concession, an admission that their betrayal was acceptable. It would be letting them win, and I couldn't let them win, not this time. It was during a late-night scrolling session on Reddit, a place I often went to escape, that the idea began to form. I was reading a post in the I'm the Asshole subreddit, a story about a family dispute over an inheritance. The comments section was a battlefield of opinions, a digital town square where people from all over the world weighed in on the morality of the situation. People were dissecting the original poster's actions, the family's motivations, the long-term consequences. And I saw the power in it. The power of public opinion, the power of exposure. My parents' greatest weapon was their control over the family narrative. They had spent 18 years curating an image of themselves as loving, selfless parents, and Sarah as the perfect daughter. They operated in a closed system, where their version of events was the only one that mattered. But what if I could break that system? What if I could take our private family drama and make it public? The idea was terrifying. It was messy and unpredictable, but it was also a weapon I could wield without a lawyer. It was a way to fight back on my own terms. I wouldn't be suing them for money. I would be suing them for their reputation. I would be forcing them to answer not to a judge, but to the court of public opinion. The plan began to take shape, moving from a vague concept to a concrete strategy. It wouldn't be a single explosive act. It would be a campaign, a slow, methodical dismantling of their perfect facade. My first step was to gather evidence. I became a secret agent in my own home, documenting the crime scene of my stolen future. I started with the wedding. I borrowed my mom's iPad under the pretense of looking up a recipe and found her Pinterest board dedicated to the wedding. It was a masterpiece of extravagance. I took screenshots of everything: the $5,000 wedding dress, the custom-made invitations that cost more than my first car, the artisanal cheese station that was being flown in from a farm in Vermont. Each image was a piece of ammunition. Next, I focused on the aftermath. I started paying close attention to the conversations my parents had, their hushed tones no longer a barrier, but a source of intelligence. I overheard my dad on the phone with his brother, complaining about how tight things were after the wedding. I heard my mom telling a friend that they had gone all out, but it had been worth every penny to see Sarah so happy. Every word was another log on the fire of my resolve. The most crucial piece of evidence came from an unlikely source, Sarah herself. She was so proud, so utterly devoid of shame, that she couldn't stop talking about the details. She showed me a video of the venue, a sprawling estate with a manicured garden and a stone fountain. She described the 7-tiered wedding cake, each layer a different flavor, and the late-night food truck that would be serving gourmet tacos to the drunken guests. She wasn't just telling me about her wedding, she was giving me a receipt. With every piece of information I gathered, the plan became clearer. I wasn't just going to post a sob story on the internet. That was too simple, too easy to dismiss. I was going to create a narrative, a meticulously crafted story that would show, not just tell, the depth of my parents' betrayal. I would use their own pride, their own social media posts, their own bragging as the foundation of my case. I would create a story so compelling, so undeniably true, that they wouldn't be able to spin their way out of it. I spent a night writing and rewriting the opening lines of my post, crafting the perfect hook. It needed to be emotional, but not whiny, angry, but not hysterical. It needed to draw people in and make them feel my injustice. And as I put the finishing touches on my dossier of evidence, a sense of calm settled over me. The rage was still there, but it was no longer a chaotic fire. It was a focused beam, a laser aimed directly at the heart of my family's lies. I knew that what I was about to do could irrevocably destroy my relationship with my parents and my sister. But as I looked at the documents on my screen, at the proof of their crime, I realized there wasn't much of a relationship left to destroy. They had already done that. My plan was set. The stage was chosen. It wasn't a courtroom. It was the rehearsal dinner, the final glittering celebration before the main event, and I was going to bring the house down. The night of the rehearsal dinner was thick with a cloying sweetness that made my stomach turn. The venue was a chic, dimly lit Italian restaurant, the kind with white tablecloths and waiters who silently refilled your water glass. It was the kind of place my parents would never normally go, a clear sign that they were still trying to project an image of wealth and sophistication, even as they quietly panicked about their depleted bank accounts. I had spent the day preparing, not just my outfit, a simple dark blue dress that felt like armor, but my mental state. I had rehearsed my role in my head, the dutiful, supportive sister. I would smile, I would nod, I would compliment the bride. I would be a ghost at the feast, unnoticed and unassuming, biding my time. My family was a masterclass in performance art. My dad was the jovial patriarch, slapping backs and telling loud, unfunny jokes. My mom was the gracious hostess, flitting from table to table, her smile a permanent, strained fixture on her face. And Sarah, glowing in a new dress, was the blushing bride-to-be, soaking in the attention like a flower in the sun. They moved through the room with practiced ease, their performance so convincing that for a moment I almost believed it myself. Almost. But I saw the cracks. I saw the way my dad's smile didn't quite reach his eyes when the bill for the pre-dinner cocktails was discreetly placed on the table. I saw the way my mom's hand trembled slightly as she raised her glass for a toast. They were living on borrowed time and borrowed money, and the pressure was starting to show. I was seated at a table with some of my second cousins and a great aunt, a woman known for her sharp tongue and even sharper ears. Perfect. The dinner proceeded as expected, a parade of toasts and congratulatory speeches. People stood up one by one to praise the happy couple. They talked about Sarah's beauty, Mark's kindness, and the beautiful life they were destined to have together. Each speech was a dagger, a reminder of the celebration that had been funded by my stolen dreams. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short and sweet. I wished them well, said I was happy for them, and sat down to a smattering of polite applause. No one could have guessed the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. After the main course was cleared, the real performance began. I waited for my moment, a lull in the conversation when my great-aunt Carol was lamenting the high cost of modern weddings. I leaned in, my expression a picture of feigned sympathy. I told her I couldn't imagine, but that Sarah and Mark deserved it all. Then I casually pulled out my phone. "Oh, Aunt Carol, you have to see the pictures," I said, my voice light and airy. "The venue is just breathtaking. Sarah showed me the professional photos they had done." I had the album ready, a carefully curated collection of screenshots I had taken from my mom's iPad and the wedding planner's social media. But these weren't just pictures. Under each photo, I had used a simple photo editing app to add a small, elegant caption in a font that matched the wedding's theme. Under the picture of the sprawling estate, the caption read, "The venue where Sarah and Mark will say their vows, a steal at only $25,000. Under the photo of the 7-tiered cake, "This masterpiece cost more than a year's tuition at a state university." Under the picture of the artisanal cheese station, a small, rustic detail, only $3,000 for imported cheeses. I handed the phone to my great-aunt, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I watched her face as she swiped through the album. Her initial smile of appreciation slowly faded, replaced by a look of confusion, then dawning horror. Her eyes widened as she read the captions, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her mouth. She looked up at me, her eyes asking a question I couldn't answer out loud. I just gave her a small, sad shrug. She didn't say another word. She quietly passed the phone to my uncle sitting next to her. The effect was like watching a virus spread in slow motion. One by one, the phone made its way around the table. The cheerful chatter died down, replaced by a tense, horrified silence. Whispers started, low and urgent. I saw my uncle glance over at my dad, his face a mask of disbelief and disapproval. I saw my cousin's eyes widen as she looked from the phone to Sarah, who was laughing loudly at the head table, completely oblivious. The first wave had hit. My plan was working. I excused myself from the table and headed to the bar, ostensibly to get a glass of water. I needed a moment to breathe, to regroup. As I stood there, I could feel the atmosphere in the room shift. The bubble of forced cheerfulness had been punctured, and the air was now thick with unspoken questions. I saw my dad pull my mom aside, his face pale and his voice a low, urgent hiss. I saw him scan the room, his eyes landing on me with a look of pure, unadulterated panic. He knew. He didn't know how, but he knew that I was the source of the sudden, chilling change in the room's mood. I held his gaze for a long moment, my expression unreadable. I wasn't the scared, heartbroken daughter from a few weeks ago. I was the architect of his discomfort. I was the one pulling the strings. My dad's face went from a proud, jovial smile to a ghostly white, and I knew my first shot had hit its mark. The night was far from over, and the rehearsal dinner was just the beginning. This was a warning shot, a taste of the chaos to come. The main event, the wedding itself, was just 2 days away, and I was just getting warmed up. The day of the wedding dawned bright and unseasonably warm, a perfect sunny day that felt like a personal insult. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and expensive perfume, a cloying combination that spoke of money and meticulous planning. The house was a hive of frantic activity. Hairdressers and makeup artists buzzed around Sarah, who was the calm center of the storm, radiating a serene confidence that I found utterly nauseating. My parents were a bundle of frayed nerves, their forced smiles doing little to hide the anxiety that had been gnawing at them since the rehearsal dinner. The whispers I had initiated had grown into a low, persistent hum of gossip that followed them wherever they went. Phone calls had been made, questions had been asked. The pristine facade of their perfect family was developing some very noticeable cracks. I spent the morning in my room, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos downstairs. I was calm. The frantic energy of the previous few days had settled into a quiet, steely resolve. I had played my part in the first act, the subtle sabotage of the rehearsal dinner. But tonight called for a different approach. Subtlety had gotten their attention. Now it was time for the truth, the full, unvarnished truth. I put on my bridesmaid dress, a hideous confection of taffeta and tulle in a shade of peach that did nothing for my complexion. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't see a bridesmaid. I saw a soldier putting on a uniform for the final battle. The ceremony itself was a beautiful, agonizing affair. It took place in the same sprawling gardens from the pictures, under a white canopy adorned with the imported flowers my parents had bankrupted themselves for. Sarah was a vision in her $5,000 dress, and Mark looked at her with an adoration that was almost painful to witness. He was a good man, and he had no idea that his perfect day was built on a foundation of lies and betrayal. As I stood at the front of the assembly, holding a bouquet of flowers that probably cost more than my monthly rent, I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was an actress playing a role, my face a mask of serene happiness. But inside, my mind was racing, going over the script I had prepared, the words I would say when the time came. The reception was held in a grand ballroom at a nearby hotel, a cavernous space filled with twinkling lights and elegantly dressed guests. The atmosphere was electric, a heady mix of champagne, celebration, and the lingering tension from the previous night's events. People were still talking, their glances in my parents' direction a mixture of pity and censure. My parents were trying to ignore it, putting on a brave face as they greeted their guests, but I could see the strain etched around their eyes. After the dinner plates had been cleared and the initial rounds of toasts were complete, the master of ceremonies, a cheesy DJ with a too bright smile, announced that it was time for more speeches. The best man told some embarrassing stories about Mark. The maid of honor wept through a heartfelt tribute to Sarah, And then the DJ looked at me. And now we'd like to hear from the bride's sister, the maid of honor. This was it, my moment. I had originally planned to give a standard, boring speech to lull them into a false sense of security. But as I walked to the podium, my heels clicking softly on the polished wood floor, I changed my mind. There was no need for games. It was time for the truth. I took the microphone, my hand steady. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the friends and family who had come to celebrate a lie. I saw my parents in the front row, their faces tight with apprehension. I saw Sarah, her expression a mixture of curiosity and expectation. I began my speech not with a funny anecdote, but with a reflection on the meaning of family. I spoke of the promises we make to one another, the sacrifices we're willing to make, and the dreams we hold for each other. My voice was calm, measured, and clear. I talked about my own dream, a dream I had had since I was a little girl. The dream of going to college, of getting an education, of building a future for myself. I spoke of the hard work, the long nights of studying, the sacrifices I had made to turn that dream into a reality. And then I paused. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, my eyes sweeping across the room. My parents always supported that dream, I continued, my voice dropping slightly. They told me they had been saving for me, that they had a college fund put aside, a promise that my future would be secure. It was the most important promise they ever made to me. I looked directly at my parents. Their faces were ashen. They knew what was coming. But a few months ago, I found out that promise was broken, I said, my voice ringing with a quiet, devastating authority. You see, my parents decided that my dream wasn't as important as another one. They decided to take the entire college fund, every single penny they had saved for my future, and they spent it. They spent it all to give my sister the wedding of her dreams. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I saw Sarah's face crumple, her perfect makeup instantly ruined by a flood of tears. I saw Mark's expression shift from confusion to dawning horror. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just stated the facts calmly and dispassionately for all to hear. I spoke of the acceptance letter from my dream school, a school I could no longer afford. I spoke of the betrayal, not just of the money, but of the trust, the love, the very foundation of our family. I finished by looking at my parents, my eyes cold and clear. So, let's all toast, I said, raising my glass in a mock salute, to Sarah and Mark, and to the beautiful, perfect, incredibly expensive wedding that I paid for. I didn't wait for a reaction. I placed the microphone back on its stand, the soft thud echoing in the deafening silence. I turned and walked away, not looking back. The sound of 1,000 gasps and a bride's heartbroken sobs was the only soundtrack I needed. I pushed through the heavy ballroom doors and stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage of my family behind me. The cool night air hit my face like a splash of water, a shocking contrast to the stuffy, emotionally charged atmosphere of the ballroom. I didn't stop walking. I moved through the hotel lobby, my peach bridesmaid dress a garish beacon, and pushed through the main doors into the parking lot. The click-clack of my heels on the asphalt was the only sound, a steady, rhythmic beat counting down the seconds to the explosion I had just triggered. I reached my car, a 10-year-old compact that was my pride and joy, and fumbled for the keys with shaking hands. I slid into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and enclosing myself in a familiar, safe space. For a moment, I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the speech was beginning to ebb, leaving in its wake a trembling, hollowed-out feeling. I had done it. I had walked into the lion's den and spoken the unspeakable truth. I had torn down the curtain and exposed the pathetic little man pulling the levers, and it felt terrifying and exhilarating. My phone, which I had silenced during the ceremony, began to vibrate in my purse. I pulled it out. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of notifications. Missed calls, dozens of them. Text messages, a relentless scrolling barrage of anger and confusion. The first few were from my parents, a mix of furious all-caps tirades and desperate pleading messages. How could you? You have ruined everything. Answer your phone right now. Then came the messages from relatives, my aunt, my uncle, my cousins. Some were angry, calling me selfish and cruel. Others were confused, asking if what I had said was true. And then there was a single message from Sarah. It was short, venomous, and utterly devoid of any sisterly love. I hate you. I read the messages, my stomach twisting into a tighter and tighter knot. This was the fallout. This was the price of my truth. I had known it would be bad, but seeing the evidence of my family's disintegration on my phone screen made it brutally real. I was officially the villain of their story, the ungrateful daughter who had committed the ultimate act of betrayal. I started the car, the engines rumble a comforting sound in the silence. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I had to get away, to put some distance between myself and the epicenter of the emotional blast I had just detonated. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something, a morbid curiosity, made me answer. I put the phone on speaker, my voice hesitant. Hello? There was a pause on the other end, then a man's voice, low and shaken. Is this Sarah's sister? It was Mark, the groom. My blood ran cold. I had expected a call from him, but I had imagined it would be filled with righteous anger, a defense of his new wife and her family. But his voice wasn't angry. It was broken. Yes, I said, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. This is she. Another pause. I could hear the sound of traffic in the background. He was outside, probably somewhere in the hotel gardens, trying to escape the chaos I had created. I don't know what to say, he stammered. What you said in there, about the college fund, is it true? I took a deep breath. There was no point in lying now. Yes, I said, my voice flat. It's true. He was silent for a long time. I could hear his breathing, ragged and uneven. I imagined him standing there in his expensive tuxedo, his perfect day shattered, his entire world tilting on its axis. I had no idea, he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah, she told me her parents had insisted on paying for everything. She said they had saved up for it, that it was their gift to us. She never said anything about you. I wasn't surprised. Sarah's version of events would always place her at the center of the universe, a benevolent sun around which everyone else's happiness was meant to revolve. My stolen future was just a minor detail, an inconvenient asteroid that had been easily diverted from her orbit. My parents didn't want anyone to know, I said. They thought I would just understand. Mark let out a short, bitter laugh. Understand? Who would understand that? Who would do that to their own child? The question hung in the air between us, a damning indictment of my parents' actions. I felt a strange sense of kinship with this man I barely knew. We were both victims of the same lie, the same elaborate, selfish deception. Listen, he said, his voice suddenly more urgent, more focused. There's something else, something you need to know. My heart started pounding again. What is it? After the ceremony, before the reception, my parents were talking to Sarah's parents, he explained. My dad offered to help with the down payment on our new apartment as a wedding gift. But your dad, he got really weird. He said they had already given us everything they could, that they were tapped out. But then Sarah pulled me aside and told me not to worry. She said her parents had promised to help us pay off the loan for the apartment and the honeymoon over the next few years. She said it was all part of the plan. I felt a chill creep up my spine. I knew my parents were broke. The college fund was gone. But this was a new level of deception. They had made a promise they couldn't keep, a lie designed to keep the illusion of their generosity alive just a little bit longer. They don't have any money, Mark, I said, my voice grim. They don't have a college fund. They don't have a down payment fund. They have nothing. There was another long silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The extravagant wedding, the vague answers about money, the insistence that he and Sarah not worry about the future. It was all a house of cards, and I had just blown it over. Oh my God, he breathed. She's been lying to me too. They all have. His voice was filled with a dawning, horrified realization. He wasn't just angry, he was disgusted. He had been played, just like I had. He had been used as a pawn in my parents' and my sister's game of make-believe. I have to go, he said, his voice suddenly hard. I have to talk to her. I don't know what I have to do." He paused, and then he said the words that changed everything. "I think we need to talk. In person. Soon." The call ended, and I was left alone in the car, the engine humming, the road stretching out before me. I had an ally, an unexpected, powerful ally. And together, I knew we could finally force my family to face the consequences of their actions. The meeting with Mark was set for a neutral, brightly lit coffee shop the next afternoon. I arrived early, my hands still trembling slightly from the emotional whiplash of the past 24 hours. I hadn't been home. I had spent the night in a cheap motel, the flickering neon sign outside my window a constant, garish reminder of the sordidness of my situation. I looked a mess, my eyes puffy from a sleepless night and my clothes wrinkled, but I didn't care. I was past the point of pretending. Mark arrived a few minutes later, looking as exhausted as I felt. He was still wearing the clothes from the night before, his tuxedo shirt rumpled and his hair disheveled. He looked like he had aged 10 years since I had last seen him. He ordered a black coffee and sat down across from me, his eyes heavy with a profound weariness. We didn't speak at first. We just sat there, two strangers bound together by a shared betrayal, the silence between us thick with unspoken questions. Finally, he broke the silence. "I called off the honeymoon," he said, his voice flat. "And I told Sarah we're not moving into the new apartment, not until we figure out exactly what's going on with her parents' finances." I was stunned. I had expected him to be angry, to confront Sarah, but I hadn't imagined he would take such decisive, immediate action. He was cutting off the financial lifeline, forcing the issue into the open. "How did she take it?" I asked. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "She cried. She screamed. She called me every name in the book. She said I was ruining her life, just like you did." He shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face. But for the first time, I saw it. I saw the manipulation, the way she tried to turn it around on me, to make me feel guilty for her lies. It was eye-opening. He then slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of a spreadsheet. "This is what I could figure out," he said. "The wedding costs, the deposits for the apartment, the non-refundable honeymoon package. It's a lot." I looked at the numbers, a dizzying array of figures that represented my stolen future. The total was staggering, far more than I had even imagined. My parents hadn't just used my college fund, they had gone into debt, borrowing against their home. Their retirement, everything, to fund this spectacle. "They're ruined," I whispered, the realization hitting me with full force. "They're completely and totally ruined." "And they tried to ruin us, too," Mark said, his voice hard. "They tried to drag me and Sarah into their financial black hole, all for the sake of a party." We sat in silence for a while longer, drinking our coffee, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. We were no longer just two victims. We were a team. We had a plan. Mark would handle the financial side, demanding full transparency from my parents and Sarah. He would make it clear that there would be no more secrets, no more lies, no more money without a complete and honest accounting. And I would be there to back him up, to provide the emotional and moral support, to ensure that the focus remained not just on the money, but on the monumental breach of trust. The confrontation happened 2 days later. We gathered in the same living room where my world had been shattered a few weeks prior. The atmosphere was thick with tension and the acrid smell of resentment. My parents looked like they had aged 10 years, their faces gaunt and their shoulders slumped in defeat. Sarah was a wreck, her eyes red-rimmed and her face a mask of fury and self-pity. Mark didn't yell, he didn't accuse. He simply laid out the facts, his voice calm and steady. He presented the spreadsheet, the numbers, the evidence of their financial recklessness. He explained that he and Sarah would not be starting their life together on a foundation of debt and deception. My parents tried to bluster, to deflect, to fall back on their tired excuses about family and sacrifice. But this time, they weren't dealing with a heartbroken teenager. They were dealing with a grown man who they had tried to swindle, a man who held a future of their precious daughter and their own financial solvency in his hands. Faced with the collapse of the perfect wedding and the very real possibility of losing their son-in-law, their facade finally crumbled. My mom broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, not out of remorse, but out of self-pity. My dad, his face a ghostly white, finally admitted the truth. The money was gone. The debt was real. They had made a terrible, terrible mistake. And Sarah, for the first time in her life, was forced to face the consequences of her own complicity. She saw the devastation she had willingly participated in, the lives she had helped ruin, and the weight of it all came crashing down on her. The reckoning was not a happy ending. It was messy and painful and raw, but it was honest. In the end, a deal was struck. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. My parents agreed to sell their vacation cabin, a place they had cherished for years, to pay off the most pressing debts. They also agreed to a formal, legally binding repayment plan for my college fund. It wouldn't cover everything, not by a long shot, but it was a promise, a real one this time. I would still have to take out student loans, but the burden would be lighter, the path forward clearer. The relationship with my sister is fractured, perhaps irreparably. The relationship with my parents is forever changed, stripped of its illusions and rebuilt on a new, more honest and more fragile foundation. A few weeks later, I packed my bags and drove to Westwood University. The campus was even more beautiful than I had imagined. I was starting my journey on a different path than the one I had planned, a path that was rockier and more uncertain, but it was a path I had forged myself. I had lost my innocence, my perfect family, and the financial security I had been promised. But in the process, I had found my voice, my strength, and an unlikely ally. I had learned that sometimes the only way to build a future is to burn down the lies of the past. I may have lost my college fund, but I found something far more valuable, myself. And that was a degree worth fighting for.